Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are, whenever you're watching this. This is Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be all about which palette I would declutter from every single brand. Last month I did this with the one palette I would keep, and I thought this month we can chat hypothetically about which palette I would have to declutter if I had to declutter one palette from every brand in my collection. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. Today's video is indeed going to be about which palette I would declutter. So this is a hypothetical video, and I've selected some palettes. I just kind of pulled them out randomly, like, yeah, from this brand I would declutter this one if I had to declutter one. The palettes that are going to be featured here are all from brands where I have three or more palettes from that brand. And of course from some of these brands I have like 20 palettes, and from others I have just 3. So it's not very much an even playing ground, but hey, we're just having fun. We're chatting about eyeshadow palettes, which is one of my favorite things to chat about, because in case you didn't know, my name is Maaike, I live in the Netherlands, and eyeshadow palettes is one of my favorite things, as is reviewing Essence and Catrice products and getting the use out of my makeup. And because I am a snow angel, meaning I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, it very greatly skews my makeup preferences. So if you are a snow angel like me and you would like to join my little club on here on the interwebs, then definitely consider subscribing, because I do lots of content that takes into account the fact that I have this very fair skin tone that just doesn't behave the way it does like many other creators on the platform. So which palettes would I declutter if it were up to me? Well, let me start and just grab one at random here. And the first thing I'm grabbing here is Game Beauty. This is their Fantasy palette. I have 3 great Game Beauty palettes. I also have the Adventure palette and the Victory palette. The Victory would be the one I would keep, and if I had to declutter one from this brand, it would be this one. Not because I don't like it. Like, look at the artwork. This is why you want to buy Game Beauty if you were interested in them. They do some really stunning game-inspired artwork. It's just so stunning. But this color story is it's just a little lackluster. It wasn't bad. Like, in terms of like a pastel palette, it's actually quite pretty, but I do feel that it is quite like blue heavy, and that means that these shades are a little drowned out by the amount of blue we get in here. It nicely goes with the front that we get here for sure, but I do feel that this palette could have perhaps been executed a bit better. I also felt that like there wasn't anything here to really deepen things up with. Like, if this had been a deeper navy matte, I might have liked it a bit better. We don't get any pressed glitters in here, which is really cool, and we do get some really stunning shimmers too. But I felt it was perhaps a little bit matte heavy, and not all of the shades in this color story went together the way I would want to put it together, so that's why this one would be the one I would declutter. A palette I almost did declutter, but decided to keep around because I felt I had decluttered enough already in my most recent eyeshadow palette declutter, is the Lime Crime Venus 3. This palette I would declutter because I have a palette already in my makeup collection that I like a bit better, that I feel can do something very similar to this, and that's the Nabla Soul Blooming. That palette has been discontinued. This you can still get, so if you were looking for that kind of like coral with a periwinkle purple kind of vibe, then this palette is definitely a good one. And that's why I do still really like this. It's a perfect spring palette. We get some pinky shades, some purples, some corals. We get enough neutrals to do a full-on neutral look. And this like bronzy shimmer, I'm not sure if the camera picks up on it, but it actually has a bit of like a pinky flip. So you could do an all purple look with this for sure. But then you also get this like pinky mauve shade, so you can do all pink. Like, you can stick to this row, you could stick to this row to make it a bit more dramatic. You can put all 8 shades together. It is still a very versatile, pretty palette. It's just that it's quite similar to something I already own, and I would reach for the Nabla over this. So this, I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to keep it around for a very long time. This is kind of on the chopping block, but maybe at some point this year I might be able to go back to it, give it another whirl, and then I might just fall in love with it all over again. But yeah, if I had to get rid of one of my Lime Crime palettes, this would be the one. If I had to get rid of one of my Shroud Cosmetics palettes, I have 3 of them, it would be this. I'm terribly sorry, but the It's Freaking Bats, which was their collab with Betty Jean from Beauty Bean, now called Betty Bean on here, is a stunning grungy color story, but the shades don't go together. I'm terribly sorry. It just, for me, on my skin tone, the way these blend out, the shades that you think are obvious and will go together don't go together. So you would think this and this will go together. Not really. These like greeny tealy shades will go together. No. These two will go together. No. So the mattes and the way those blend out, if I put them in my crease, for instance, and then putting the shimmer with it, just doesn't really go well with my complexion. Are these still really stunning shades, and can you do some stunning grungy looks with this? For sure, but I have now in my brain categorized this as a complementary palette to other things, but as a standalone palette, I just found it less successful than the Arcana and the Creepy Cute that I also own, which is why if I had to be very tough on myself, this is the one I would get rid of. Nabla was a brand I already mentioned, so the Soul Blooming would definitely stay. The one I would declutter is the Platinum Cutie. Well, technically they are decluttered, but I did declutter some of the other cutie palettes already. They're still around in my house, but I no longer consider them part of my makeup collection. But because the Nabla Cutie palettes make for like a nice little family, I have put the ones that were less successful for me in a separate drawer. But this is one that I did decide to keep around. So of the ones from Nabla that I still have, the Cutie palette in Platinum would be the one I would declutter. And I know, shock horror, she would declutter a cool tone palette. The reason I would declutter this one is because it's not that cool toned. I have dubbed this many times the cool tone palette for people who don't like cool tones. Like, if you find that cool tones pull too gray toned on you because you have a very warm or olivey undertone and it just makes you look a little ill if something leans too gray toned. I mean, on me, if I wear something that's a bit more cool toned like I'm wearing today, it really makes my eyes pop. This is still cool toned, so it's gonna give you that vibe, but because it has these like warmish tones that pull a bit more red, it just isn't that cool toned. For me, these though really work quite well because they blend out quite pinky almost, and we do get a really nice cool tone brown. But for me, really, it's like 3 cool tones and then 3 warm tones. That's the way this really works in my brain. And this goldy bronze shade has a bit of a green undertone. It's that like antique-y gold. So this is why, for me, out of all of the cool toned palettes that I have in my collection, this is still a really good one, but I just prefer my cool tones to be true, actual cool tones, rather than this weird middle ground that we get in this palette. So that's why the Cutie Platinum would have to go. And this next pick may surprise people a little bit, but from Tarte, I have a couple of palettes. I have 3 of these Tartelette palettes, and the one I would declutter would be the Toasted, because it's warm toned. I mean, I decided to select this over the Juicy, even though that was less successful for me, but I feel that in the Juicy, it's still a little bit more unique in my collection. I have other warm tones, namely a Nabla Cutie palette, that I just prefer over this by now. The only reason why I didn't end up decluttering this is because I now don't want to break up my Tarte family. I'm terrible, I know. And this is still a really good warm tone palette, but I don't love warm tones on myself all that often. So that's why this Toasted palette from Tarte would have to go. Now this is a bit of a random one, and I didn't feature it in my what I would keep video that I did a couple of weeks ago, but Persona Cosmetics, I have both their palettes. I think there are only 2 out. The Identity 1, the Identity 2. And the Identity 2 I wanted to feature here to say, yeah, if I had to declutter a Persona palette, it would be this one. The Identity 1 I love, so I would definitely keep that. But this is just a bit haphazard of a color story. It is really pretty when it comes to jewel tones. But really, if I look at it, the only shades that really speak to me are these 3. Like this matte, and then these 2 purpley periwinkle kind of shimmers. Everything else, I mean, I can make it work. I've done looks with this and I can make it work, but yeah, maybe the green. Like this quad, that's what speaks to me. But this yellow tone gold is just not my vibe. This is a bit too orange for me. I do like these two shimmers as well. Those go really well with my brown eyes, but overall I felt this was a bit too dark for me, and the colors didn't really go together the way I'd like to, even though it has the same great formula that the Identity one has. If I had to pick, this one would have to go. Another favorite brand here is Viseart, and actually the one I would declutter is the palette that got all of my other Viseart purchases started. So I used to own one of those bigger pro palettes that they had. It was called the Sultry Muse. I think they still do it, but they now are doing those pro palettes that came in the clear packaging and like smaller, more manageable packaging, which I think is a good move on their part. But I didn't love it because it only had one sort of finish in all of the different shades, which meant that every look looked very flat and like very one-dimensional because everything had the same level of satin to it. Like if you love satins, then Viseart has your back because they do some really good satins. But I had heard everybody raving about Viseart mattes, and I'm not an all matte kind of gal. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give the brand another chance. And so I bought myself the Petite Pro 3. I had heard Emily Noel raving about this because you do get some interesting shades in here. You have enough neutrals, but then you get this like something like a bit more plum, a more mauve toned kind of neutral, and then two greens. Here's the thing. I have since tried Petit Four Lilas, Midsummer, Cashmere, Étoile, and Violette Étendue, which is my favorite. And out of all of those, this is my least favorite of the bunch. Do I want to declutter this? No. I love the greens that are in here. But yeah, this, it just wasn't my jam as much as the other ones. Even though I really like the formula in here, I like the color story. If I had to pick, this is the one. Menagerie is another brand where I have quite a few, and with some of the palettes that I'm showing you today, the reason why I would declutter them is because these color stories weren't perfect, and that also went with the Menagerie Whale Song palette. So when I opened this up, it's not the original color story, because I had another Menagerie palette that I felt wasn't perfect, so I've replaced some of the shades with some of the shades from the Violent Ink, which are these three. Am I right? Yeah, these three. Because I felt there were some blues in here that pulled very similarly once I started blending them together. So I felt that the bluey, inky shades from the Violet Ink would go really well in here. Plus I put in an extra shimmer because I really enjoy Menagerie's shimmer formula. So yeah, I got rid of what I would dub duplicate shades, and now this has a little bit more vibrancy to it. And that's what I need. I know that a lot of people like this for like a very grungy blue-green palette, but for me it was just too dark and everything looked the same once I blended it out. ColourPop. I think I said that some of these I own 20 palettes by. I think ColourPop may be the brand that applies to. That and Urban Decay. But the Never Tore Us Apart. I tried this quite recently and I bought this as part of a set. So this was the one quad where I was like, do I really need that? And I was like, no, I don't. And then I tried it and I kind of confirmed for myself what I already knew, which was that this is just not my kind of color story. I got it as part of a set, so essentially this was like it made it free in a way, because I believe the set with the discount I had made that, you know, buying 3 of these in one set was as expensive as buying 2. So I kind of got to try it for free, so I don't hate on it that much. I just felt that these shades just didn't look as interesting as they do in the pan once I applied them to my lids. This shade here is the one that you hear everybody raving about, but on me it just pulled like a gold. It didn't have, like in the pan it seems to have a bit of a green kind of flip. No, not on me. It just wasn't there. And then you're just left with like warm tone neutrals and a cocky green. And I'm like, I have other coffee greens that I like. So sorry, ColourPop, but the Never Tore Us Apart would be the one that I would declutter from all of my ColourPop palettes. Kaleidos does some really, really stunning eyeshadow, and I really love my Futurism palettes, but here as well, I did declutter some, the VR Neons, and I actually destroyed the Futurism one because I felt, again, it was too similar to other things I already had, and I repressed other shadows into those pans. So the one that I still have left that I would declutter is the Cyber Bronze, because this is just the most boring one. It doesn't look as boring anymore because this isn't the original color story. This used to come with a rose gold, but I decided to put the only shade from the VR neons that I did like in here. So this is not the way this is supposed to look like. Yeah, I couldn't get rid of that really stunning vibrant pink shade. So I popped it in here to make this color story more exciting, but it's still not my favorite. But the packaging of this is absolutely stunning. So I could never get rid of this for that reason. Another brand that I have quite a few palettes by is Melt, and I love Melt, but their color stories aren't always for me, so I've stayed away from most of them. But one color story that I do have that I just don't really find myself reaching for all that much is the Smoke Sessions. So if you were to ask me what Melt palette would you get rid of, it would be this, really. It does have some stunning greens in here, which is the reason why I want to keep it. Like these greeny, tealy, turquoise, like, life. These four, boring as heck. So even though, like, yeah, this does have a bit of like grungy green, so I don't mind it that much, but these like yellow tone golds, this is one of the reasons why I got rid of those Kaleido shades, because I do feel I already have Melt Gemini, I have this one, but I kind of feel that this is, again, like the It's Freaking Bats from Shroud Cosmetics. I feel this just doesn't make for a standalone palette. Pulling these shades into the Melt Gemini, stunning! But I want my palettes to be also workable as standalone palettes, and this just isn't as versatile as I'd like it to be. I already said warm tones are not my jam, so guess what Urban Decay Naked palette I would get rid of? Naked Heat. Like, if I had to choose, I love the Naked palettes though. So this is even like, even though I have decluttered some of these, I'm not getting rid of them because I don't want to break up the family. I have all of them, including the Naked one, which is no longer officially part of the family. But of the ones that I've decided to keep around, this would be the one that I would get rid of for sure, because it's just so one note. And it's not a note that I like. In terms of warm tones from the Naked line, the Naked Honey is by far my favorite. I do really like the formula. I love some of the shades in here, don't get me wrong. I would keep this over the Tartelette Toasted. If I had to like make a choice between warm tones, I would keep this over the Toasted one because I feel that has too many shades I already have in other palettes. This is still a little bit more unique because it has that reddish undertone. So I do love this in terms of that, but if I had to get rid of one Naked palette, it would be this. And if I had to get rid of one of my ABH palettes, it would be this. It's a lot of warm tones. I'm looking at this. I feel a little guilty. But yeah, the Modern Renaissance. I know this was so hyped up by everybody. I still have my original one. Mine is still fine, but I have only ever really gravitated towards the berry and the reds in here. Everything else in here just doesn't really work for me. I do like, is this Cypress Umber? Yeah, I do like that, but I believe that's also in the Soft Glam. So I don't really need all of these shades. Like Bon Fresco and then Antique Bronze, and then is this Love Letter? Love Letter, and then Venetian Red and Red Ochre. Those are like the 5 shades I still reach for in this palette, and everything else I'm like, like the amount of people I hit pan on this. And then you see mine and it's pretty much pristine because I only use it in the fall time to like one very particular look, which I do for like a week in like October, and then I never go back to it. That's been the fate of my Modern Renaissance. Yes. Another OG favorite brand that a lot of people talked about but nobody seems to chat about anymore, but Lorac. Their Pro 2 palette, stunning. It's a cool tone palette. But I would declutter this over the Pro 3 and the Pro 4 because I feel those work a bit better with my complexion. This is cool toned, but because it doesn't have that many neutral shades, I mean, we get quite a lot of these like more colorful things, and that's what I've always appreciated about this. But that's why I would get rid of this, because I have other cool tone palettes I would just prefer. I do like the navy and also that purpley shade. This nectar shade is stunning. It's got some really good shimmers here. I love jade. Yeah, this has some really good shades, but if I really had to be picky, this would be the one. I would also want to get rid of some colorful things, and I realized I have 3 palettes by Glam Shop, which is a Polish indie brand, and I was sort of going back and forth because I said the one I would definitely want to keep is the Coco Sanka. Great cool tone, neutral color story, but I think I would get rid of this. The Niebieski 2020, which is blue, and it's their blue palette, and even though this matte blue is stunning, but the only other palette I have from them is a green palette, and that had more like duochromy flippy kind of shimmers than this does. So this looks a little less exciting at first glance, even though this is one of my favorite blue tone palettes I have ever tried. So this is going nowhere, but again, hypothetical. I was talking about warm tones already there for a minute. The Saharan from Juvia's Place. Again, a palette I altered. Because this is not the original color story, because I changed this shade. I repressed the red from the Afrique into this. It used to be like a peachy shade. I don't really like peachy shades on myself all that much. This is stunning. Again, in terms of like warm tone palettes in my collection that I greatly appreciate, this is one of the best ones, especially because of that very bright shade. And even though it's a warm tone palette, this it's almost like a greenish tone gray. It's so special. It definitely has some unique shades in here that I really, really enjoy, which is why it gets to stay around. But if I looked at all of my Juvia's Place palettes that I still have in my collection, this is the one that I feel least excited about. And then we also need to talk bougie things. Natasha Denona. The Lila would be the one that I declutter. Like the Juvia's Place, this is no longer the original color story because I switched this shade out for the yellow tone gold from the gold palette, and I put this shade, which is called Dragon Bite, in that palette to make it more perfect for myself. I went back to this before I decided whether I want to declutter this or not, and because it has some really good neutral shades, like cool toned and like true neutrals, I decided to keep this in my collection. But this just doesn't excite me. This is my first Natasha Denona palette, and I remember trying this and thinking, really? This is what I paid 113 euros for? I didn't get the hype, but then I tried some other things and I was like, for instance, that gold palette. And then I did get it, but this was like just not that impressive to me. Another very bougie option, Pat McGrath. And I think I featured another quad in like the thing I would definitely keep. I would not recommend going into her mothership palettes. They are quite big, they're quite clunky, and they're very expensive. I think the quads are like a better way to try the brand. This is one of the Blitz Astral quads, and this was the first thing, again, I tried from the brand. This is in Nocturnal Nirvana, and I remember thinking, really? That's why people are hyping up this brand? Like, what's going on here? Because I did not like this at all. I very greatly struggled with making these stick on my eyes, but that was because I didn't realize how to use these. But yeah, these are a little bit more finicky than I feel the formulas I have tried since then. So I definitely don't think this is the same as what you get in the motherships or in the Lux quads that she's been doing currently. Also, there are no mattes in this. We get this yellow tone gold, which for me, that just didn't really work. And the two shades that I really still like are the purple and the green, but that blue I also felt wasn't too special. So at the end of the day, with how much I paid for this, I just wasn't impressed, which is why this would be decluttered if I had to. From BH, I really struggled deciding which one I would want to declutter. And then I was like, well, if I would declutter from Glam Shop, the blue palette, I would have to declutter my green palette from BH, because I would then keep the bubblegum, which would be my blue palette, over the Glam Shop one. But if I keep the green toned one from Glam Shop, I don't necessarily need to keep this. This is the BH Cosmetics Sweet Shop Pistachio palette. It's stunning. It's one of my favorite green palettes. But if I had to really declutter one BH palette, it would be this one. I was on the fence about the blueberry muffin, but then I was like, it does have some really good neutrals and it would still be a blue tone palette, and I do really like that. Passion and Parents also wasn't perfect, but I feel that with this, it's very sort of one note, so that's why I was like, I would declutter this for sure. Catrice is a brand we also need to mention because I have quite a few palettes from them, and I was like, yeah, I would declutter the Pro Slim palette in Natural Spirit. It's nice, but again, it's quite warm toned. It does have those like cocky greens that I do really appreciate in this palette. It's got really lovely quality, but for me, the Catrice 5 in a Box palette just beat this every single time, which is why that would have to go. And from Too Faced, I'm going to show you two options because one would be cheating. Because the Gingerbread Spice, I put all the shades in from Gingerbread Spice, Chocolate Bar, and Sweet Peach that I wanted to keep. So this is not what the original Gingerbread Spice looked like. So that's why, yeah. These are not these shades, and that's why I felt it would be cheating if I said I wanted to declutter that, which is why from the Too Faced palettes that are still in its original state, I would declutter the chocolate bonbons. I know, the cool toned option, but I prefer my chocolate bar, the white chocolate bar, over this. And that's why if I had to declutter a cool toned color story from Too Faced, it would be this one. I just have a few more palettes left. From Odin's Eye, I would declutter the Hella palette. I would keep my Norns. I would keep my Solomona. And the reason why I would declutter this, I do really like the packaging of this. It's just that this is not my kind of color story that I would reach for on a day-to-day basis. Like Solomona is more wearable to me, and also the Norns had some really interesting shades, and that was quite cool toned. Whereas with this, I mean, I just want to try it, and it has some really stunning shades here. I haven't put this on my face yet, but I just know with this one that because of those brights pop of green and pink, it's just not going to be an everyday palette for me, whereas the other two could be, and that's why I would declutter this. Huda Beauty Chocolate Brown Obsessions palette. This is perhaps like the one that I'm just least excited about. I don't really think about this palette. I bought it because it was my favorite of the brown tone palettes that she came out with. It's nice. It's really pretty as a complementary palette to some of the other Obsessions palettes I have in my collection. But as a standalone palette, I don't really think about this. I don't really reach for it. It's very similar in the way I look at this to the Nabla Cutie in Analog, which I would keep over this. So I would have still something similarly in my collection. So this is one that's like an easy declutter for me if I had to. And for a similar reason, I would declutter the Dose of Color Smoky Soiree. I have a quintet from Dior that I feel does a very similar thing to this. This is really pretty for a smoky eye. It has some stunning shades, but I feel that the Dior Golden Nights Black Night palette they did for Christmas one year is very similar to this. So again, I don't need to keep this around if I really had to take that decision. And the final palette I have for you today is from Zoeva, because I love my Zoeva collection. But if I had to get rid of one, it would be Cocoa Blend. And not because I don't like this, it's just this color story is just a little bit dated. I feel it's very sort of like 2016, which is probably when this palette came out, I'm not sure. But those like cranberry shades, you just don't really see that much anymore. It is stunning. I still really like mine, especially because of these shades here. And then you have these four really good neutrals here. But I just kind of feel that like this is the section that makes it a bit dated. So that's why I have other Zoeva palettes that I love much more. If I had to pick, this would be the one I would declutter. So thank you very much for being here today. Those were all the palettes I wanted to share with you today. These are the ones that I would declutter if I had to pick one for my current makeup collection as it stands. So I really hope you enjoyed watching today's video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more by me. I make several videos a week, so I hope you like to stay tuned for more. Take care, everybody, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye-bye.